and welcome back to V-Road, CCTCG's weekly Vanguard Podcast. I'm Cole.
And I'm Jared.
And Trey is busy, so it's just us two today. That's not a big deal, though. Especially because of our topic today, which is the beginning of a little series I want to try, where we get through each of the nations and we discuss, not so much just their competitive history with each of the decks that come out of this nation, but also their general mechanic and like how they feel and what they focus on the most compared to other nations, the strengths and weaknesses it has against other nations and stuff like that. So why don't you start us off with something about their mechanics?
So Stoicheia as a nation had a lot of foundational things that it could build off of from...
Oh, okay, hold up. Wait, never mind, you're good.
Okay, do you want me to start again?
Yeah.
Alright, so Stoicheia as a nation had a lot of good fundamental things that it could go into with the history it has of all its different clans that make it up, having cool, unique mechanics. They don't get that into the mechanics of older clans until later in the nation, unfortunately, but they do give it some of the more unique aspects. Like, one of the early things they put in as a, main push and drive of that nation is normal orders, a new thing to Vanguard. They did this as a flagpole with Zorga, where they, really wanted you to be playing these normal orders, which are just cards that you play, they do their effect, and then they go to the drop zone. They have very, very high variance on what they do. Generally, most of them are some level of either retire a thing, get a thing back, draw cards, or power. Those are, all the things you would expect a Vanguard deck to be able to do. They just do it through a little bit of a different aspect.
Oh, wow. Stoicheia and Brantgate are what I like to refer to as the technical nations. They get to what they want to do through orders or a more roundabout means of whatever other decks do. So this kind of comes from the newer mechanics it's adopting into what it did previously back when it was Zoo and Magallanica. And because when we first got Standard, they had to consolidate these two separate nations into one and leave a Bermuda Triangle to itself in the corner, I guess. But it ended up making this nation have a very mixed identity of what it really wanted to be doing. And I think out of all of these nations we're going to cover with this little series, it's going to be the one that has the most stuff going here and there and not really extremely unified beyond that maybe all of them use orders in some way.
Yeah, and even in using orders, there's three bosses that care about playing orders, and then there's a support card for most of the bosses, at least, that is a normal order but not integral to the build. Which is just feels weird that they with Zorga right out the gate, they planted a flag of this is the normal order nation and printed so many comparatively to the other nations. Feels weird that they just kind of existed. Now they are the normal order nation in a way, but don't hard push it that other nations push their mechanics.
Yeah, I think from here we can get right into what the bulk of this section is going to be, where we're going to go through every set in Standard and take a look at the boss units and decks that came out of that set and kind of analyze how this helps construct the identity of Stoicheia the nation. And what you said right there was how we got Zorga in set 1. Him and Magnolia were the two decks that kind of made sure everybody knew that this nation was trying to do a lot at this under the same umbrella, because Magnolia just tried to get 6 attacks on a Persona right turn. It tried to get a bunch of attacks. And we do see that carry into like future decks down the line with wanting to be honestly fairly aggressive for being a technical nation, and Zorga, who just wants to have a bunch of orders and does stuff with the drop zone, which is a lot. It's like a whole other direction, at least to me. I don't know.
Yeah, like, when I was going through all the different, like, bosses for this, and I was, like, trying to think of, like, what does Magnolia do? What does, like, this nation do? And I was like, Magnolia does a couple things really well. It generally has the ability to build a board, because you needed to do that to fill all 6 slots to do it. And then it was the nation that could, like, multi-attack more than the other nations. And as Standard evolved, that just became less of a, like, Stoicheia thing. Like, the board building and being, like, very rearguard, Peter Sanctuary does that very well. Board building is kind of their thing now, which is a very good, why it's a very healthy nation to always build around. And have, like, has such strong generic pieces. And then, like, the multi-attacking thing, Standard's just evolved into, you're a 4+ attack deck. No 3 attack decks really exist in the meta. And the ones that do exist have to do it in a very specific way.
Yeah, so at least, you know, when set 2 rolled around, it wasn't anything more than, like, support for Magnolia and Zorga and all them, and...
Yeah,
then...
which I...
Go ahead.
Yeah, like, I think the card that's, like, really indicative of them trying to push, like, drop zone recursion, which is, like, part of Zorga's identity, is Wild Intelligence, just showing you that this nation will like to play with its drop zone.
For sure.
Which will be a common thing, even if they aren't using orders, aren't using things. Like, just a lot of their generics like their drop zone. And set 2 also had Kingfisher, which Bushi has supported in a recent set. So I had to put it on the list, unfortunately.
Yeah. Will always be an odd one. I do gotta respect it when they remember cards like those exist. Because
yeah,
they made it, so...
Bushi never will leave a deck behind, and that is true.
So. Yep, for sure. But going into set 3 was when we got our first, you know, new Stoicheia boss to go with these other 2, and it was Flagberg. And it was like the Aquaforce part of the Stoicheia pie that merged to becoming Stoicheia, so we knew we were gonna see it eventually, but this one I think came out of the oven in a really weird way. It wasn't like terrible by no means, but it wasn't insane either. It was fine. It was doing the Aquaforce thing. It wanted to get 5 attacks. It cared about how many attacks you got. This guy had to be the last one, even though it didn't like kind of write it on the card like, oh, wave 5. Like, he had to be your last attack essentially. But
yeah, I love the stupidly named dragon, and I like that Aquaforce gets representation. Unfortunately for him, the encounter card that coming up will also be an Aquaforce card, which I think just unfortunately diminishes Flagberg's importance to the history of this nation, unfortunately. But I do like that he was a weird boss at the time, because he wanted to attack last. Because the pattern for this early Standard was almost always attack with rearguard, attack with boss, and then restand. That one rearguard was like, if you had restands.
Yeah, there were Aquaforce decks that did want their Vanguard to attack last, namely in V, not so much in, like, you know, the Boomer Vanguard, but yeah, it wasn't a relatively new playstyle, especially for, like, Aquaforce, but he feels like a boss that's here because, like, we needed more to put in Stoicheia at the time, because Standard was still relatively new. It was set 3. It was only like 9 months after the format started, so.
And in those 9 months, we had like 10 decks, basically, I think, because it was like 5 of each nation from the starter decks and so it was time to like actually start building out all the nations.
Yeah, and then I believe in set 4, the only truly notable thing was Magnolia getting its grade 4, which still sees play today. recently getting support. And
I
stuff.
think you are undermining one of the best cards printed in that set.
Which one?
And that's Inlet Pulse.
Oh, yeah.
Inlet Pulse is still continued to play in almost every deck that can fit it in that says, like, some version of you need to attack 4 times. It's plus soul, it's plus cards, like, it attacks from the back row. What do you need? It does so much for this nation. And I like that they, like, keep on planting these cards that say, hey, this nation gets, bonuses for extra attacking other than the inherent benefit of just hitting more times.
Yeah, Inlet Pulse is so weird because it's very clearly meant for Flagberg, and that is literally the only deck where a unit can, like, stand itself with its own ability to Soul Blast 1. Like, it gets used in an encounter deck coming up, but like, what it's meant for is just to go into Soul and draw a card. Like, it fulfills the same role as I believe it was not Quarrel Assault in V, where it just, if you attack 4 or more times, it goes into Soul and you draw a card. Like,
it also sees playing Magnolia Elder to this day as well.
Yeah.
Just that deck has a problem with finding cards, so
and it's a grade 3.
Back row. Yeah.
Yeah, being a grade 3 is really big too. Beyond Set 4 was the first deck, like, I ever truly really got into with Stoicheia, and that was Roa. He wasn't particularly great for a long while in his life. I still think he's pretty meh, but yeah. I do really like that. Hey, they finally let Neo Nectar be represented in Stoicheia. This is like our first plant token boss. That is just a classic thing of that clan, and they brought it to standard with Varroa. Unfortunately, he's very mid. Yeah, I mean, and they even gave him a defensive skill, which was really cool. Mm-hmm. And, means to get 4 attacks. That was actually pretty creative, and it's still kind of creative to this day. Like, it's special token that its supporting rearguard can make that can attack from the back row if it's in the same column as it. I think that's kind of cute, and it eats all the plant tokens, it gets bigger. It just needed to kill the opponent quickly because it didn't really have a lot of gas to live through a long game, and it didn't really have the ability to be consistent enough with the fast game plan it has for what it was.
Mm-hmm. I also, I think Red Zorga also came around this time.
Right after, in a reprint set.
I didn't remember where it was, but so I vaguely put it in this area.
Sure.
But, man, that card took Zorga to a new level.
Oh, yeah.
Like, the inherent, is it 10k power to the front row?
I think it was 5k, but even then, that went so far in that deck. So.
Yeah, because then you could actually hit, and, like, the amount of power it gained, it's just utility. It was a very nice upgrade to Zorga, and made it less clunky, which was always that deck's problem, was, you hold, like, 20 orders in hand, and they swing, and you have no guard value.
Yeah, it shifts Zorga's focus from reviving units to recurring your orders, so you could always use the ones you needed at the time. So that also meant you could play a little fast and loose with them and, like, discard them for ride deck or what have you. So it did help in that regard. But I know for a long time there was, like, a reason to go between one or the other when it came to, like, builds for the deck, which I thought was kind of cool.
I think it was just the one order that gave 3 instances of 10k to 3 different rear guards that Blue Zorga could play, and I think that was basically it.
Yeah. Was
the difference on those. I don't remember the name of that order.
It's not Clouded Miasma because that card is still used. I don't remember what it is, but I feel like I remember an order like that. Zorga was never on my radar too much. It does, at least with Roa now here, I think it does also kind of illustrate that this nation opens itself to a lot of, like, tech cards. When we get into set 6, as we are now, I know it got one of its, like, strongest generic tech cards in Diantha.
Yeah, like, Diantha was really weird, because when it came out alongside Leonore, who we'll talk about here in a sec, and it read like almost all of Leonore's cards, where it just, basically acts like a 13k for playing Vanguard. It just needs to have another grade 1 in play. But the fact that it was a generic card that could revive any unit from your drop, like, that was just... The number of times I've seen that in decks, as someone who played Leonore, and I saw in things that weren't Leonore, and I was like, oh yeah, that card is generic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like,
it helped that it was a grade 1, too.
Yeah, it's such an easy thing to slide in. It's a good level of generic where it doesn't feel like it's oppressing deck slots of, like, decks that have actually lots of in-archetype support, where it just, like, does everything. It doesn't, but it does, like, one very good thing that is found in some cards in it, but the fact that it's finally on a unit, because I know there are a lot of orders that did this as well.
We had, like, Spiritual Body Condensation from set 1 was, like, a really common tech card in a lot of Stoicheia decks.
Yeah, but the fact that it's on a unit, which is just inherently easier to throw in a deck, because at worst,
it's a 5k shield.
It's a 5k shield and an 8k attacker, like...
Yeah, for sure. And I think when this nation got Leonore in set 6, it finally had something that didn't feel like it was tied to too much of any one thing. Like, its base gimmick of wanting your whole back row to boost her didn't demand, like, oh, you needed to play these specific orders, or attack this amount of times, or have, like, grade 2s or something in the back row you can attack with. It was just like, we're opening you up to a more generic playstyle, and I think Stoicheia, like, benefited a lot from it.
Yeah, I like the breadth that Leonore brought to Stoicheia, because it just... Man, if you didn't want to play Magnolia, that was your closest thing to, like, normal Vanguard, heavy quotation marks, that you could be playing. And that deck just has inherent problems with it until it gets the, like, myriad of support it gets down the line. But Leonore, it got, like, it wasn't great out the bat, but that's because it was mostly competing with Ava, Youthberg, which were all very good at the time. But I played this deck on set 6, and it was relatively fine. You just couldn't beat Youthberg, but the fact that it was really nice and generic, that it had a bunch of cool support cards, I just liked the deck a lot. I know Cole, will eventually learn to love that deck.
Yes. As for, like, what this deck got up to, I know nowadays it is actually, like, probably one of the best decks in the format. It's always my opinion that a deck with a fairly open-ended, and not even generic playstyle, but open-ended one that can benefit from can benefit from generic cards, even if the deck, like, the boss itself isn't asking for something generic, really helps its longevity and its ability to, like, stay relevant in the meta. And that's really true with this card. Like, this deck has become meta and stayed meta relevant ever since it got its upgraded boss form in set 13 when we get to that. But it's one of the few decks on here that is like that. And I think going into that, in set 7, all it got was something that could help it get more than 3 attacks, which was cool.
Yeah, Resonance Dragon, set 7 was just kind of a support set, so there's nothing hugely relevant. Resonance Dragon came into existence, which made Leonore actually, like, play very well into the more modern metagame. Still wasn't, like, the best. But it let Leonore sit into the giant nebulous zone of tier 2 that Vanguard has without feeling bad.
Yeah, but then, after set 7, we got into set 8 with a couple more encounter decks, and this time we got the Aquaforce. We got the boy, Maelstrom.
I'm sorry, Flagberg, but Maelstrom I think is just a way, like, more cool design in that it wants you to play things in a certain way, but gives you flexibility in its attacking, where Flagberg just didn't.
And it rewards you so much better for that.
Yeah, it doesn't make you go all in on your Vanguard and just throw these like pitiful 10k attacks at your opponent. It gave out like 5k to its thing that will do 2 attacks. I had a bunch of good rear guards for promoting, swapping back rows to front rows. Specifically, the grade 1 that was like Soul Blast after a boost.
Wheel Assault?
I think it's Wheel Assault.
I think so. But yeah, this deck firmly slots into the I want to do a bunch of attacks, I'm a fairly aggressive deck slot of Stoicheia, where I think most decks tend to fall into one of two camps, where they're very order-based and they're not as fast, but they're more consistent, and a deck like Maelstrom that wanted to put a lot of pressure on the opponent.
Yeah, Maelstrom is such a fun deck to play. And you feel so big brain when you do it correctly, even though it's literally most of the time Paladin Impulse, attack twice, attack with second rearguard promote.
Yeah, this card came out in the same set as like a Luque and a Minerva and all them, and it's always kind of strange to me that this deck didn't reach the same heights those decks did, and in some cases still do. So yeah, I don't know. It's not a bad deck, but
yeah, I think like playing Magnolia Elder, and even in that deck in Modern Era, and I think this is why Maelstrom hasn't. Like Magnolia Elder gives power to all its rear guards that it's attacking with. Maelstrom struggles to hit with anything beyond the first 2 attacks.
Yeah, that's fair.
Outside of triggers, unfortunately.
Yeah.
If he had, other than the promo that he gets later down the line that gets power for your Blue Storm Armadas, like, he just can't hit beyond that, unfortunately.
You know what? That actually kind of reminded me. I think this is actually one of the decks that kind of sits nicely in the middle between the Stoicheia decks that rely on using orders and the decks that want to be fairly aggressive, because it needed to use that order to upgrade its resources and stuff. So
yeah, the Blue Storm Armada. What's it called? Oh, Judgment Maelstrom. It's called Judgment Maelstrom, which is such a cool name. The card is like, you read it, it's like genuinely fantastic. And then you reread it and go, wait, it only revives a unit the first time, it gives no power?
Yeah.
That's like the one thing that I always look back at that card and go, they kind of messed up with it, was not making it give 5k for each one in your order zone, it's for each other one. Yeah. So it doesn't give any power beyond.
If it was like a grade 1?
Yeah, if it was like even a grade 2, so you could start gaining the power on your first Maelstrom. Yeah, it's a grade 3.
Oh my god, I guess I just don't remember.
You cannot start gaining power off of that order on your first Maelstrom turn, regardless.
Okay, well, another deck that goes cleanly into the I just want to get a bunch of attacks or push you really hard is Granfia. Also, kind of was the first other deck in Stoicheia that wanted to use plant tokens. This one used it a lot. So much so that it has its own special token that all of its plant tokens accumulate under, which I thought was kind of cute.
I really like the plant gauge, and I have a certain fondness for Granfia because in the very scuffed format that is Vanguard Draft,
yeah,
I got the whole ride line off of this guy, and I swept that tournament with it, and it just felt really cool to just like play Farm and Pumpkin, get a bunch of tokens, have Noblest Rose, who gets all the power of the tokens basically, and then Granfia gets to restand something with the power of it. It felt really cool, and it fits the theme of Stoicheia, where you're kind of just working on your little engine until your opponent just like dies from either giant number or lots of things.
Yeah, for sure. After set 9, I don't think there was much to mention in set 10. I could be.
You are forgetting something very huge that happened.
Am I?
Yes, you are.
What is it?
2 big bosses. Leonorn and Thorga got masked forms.
Oh,
I'm sorry, but
look,
those
man,
fundamentally changed how those two decks function.
It did. Yeah, it did.
And so Leonord Mask started out as like this, it felt like, compared to original Leonord, had like, oh, you could like do some like other things with it, and it felt just like a slightly different, flexible Leonord, until you got to the fact that the mask just is an almost oppressive piece of card advantage and value, because going second as a mask deck is just stealing the play from your opponent. So you will always be the first one to Persona Ride in every game, which that is an important part of winning Vanguard games in the current standard.
Yeah, especially when it came to Leonord Mask, it was strange because it shifted the deck from being very Vanguard centric to being very rearguard centric, and I don't think it had enough tools to be able to do that efficiently until later. So what Leonord ended up being was a deck that had to build a full board, as it usually always did, and it could get 5 attacks at that point with a Leonord Mask, but you had a lot of things had to go right versus its original form, where you just needed to make sure you had enough boosters for a Leonord yourself. And that was the bare minimum. It wasn't trying to use the way Leonord stood rear guards to get 5 attacks or anything like that.
Yeah, and then like Mask could do the restand for 5 attacks, which made it a little more flexible, but it had problems building that board until it got like some key pieces later down the line, like Rosarium Fairy, that like just is a great piece for at least getting things on board to just do the bare minimum mechanics, because it is inherently powerful to do 5 attacks.
Yeah. But okay. Yeah, fine. Masks were a thing, especially Zorga Mask.
I was about to say,
Zorga Mask was actually very meta relevant when it came out. It was a really solid threat.
Like, Zorga Mask is kind of insane, like, in the way that it just slots into the deck.
Yeah.
You just put in the 4 copies, doesn't matter, you didn't think too hard about it, because the main part, Mask of Hydrogem, that, you know, you need to do to get the inherent power mask. I was already playing Shadow Cloak anyway, a card that could look through the deck for the mask order and just throw it into the drop zone.
And it's
where you wanted it.
It's an order, which was the thing that Zorga manipulated the best anyway already. So it wasn't really, you weren't really asking much of the Zorga player.
Yeah. So if like, oh, you drew the mask awkwardly instead of dropping it with Shadow Cloak. Okay, play it, Alchemagic it onto something else.
Yeah.
Like...
Yeah. Okay, and then in set 11, we got a new form for Roa, which was actually pretty cool. It let he himself be rather threatening. It gave him 5k and a crit, which is what the deck needed, and it shored up a bit of the hand problem the deck had, where it made tokens that when they're retired you get to draw a card. So it basically read activate Persona Rite, draw 1, you've got those 2 plants. Then when the little dragon token eats them, you get to draw 2, which is really good, and it did help you have some semblance of a late game. But it still wasn't really enough. I think what that deck was always, and still kind of is, missing is rear guards that can help facilitate its playstyle way better than what it got. Like in that set, it got a grade 2 that could get you a Radiolina from the drop zone, which wasn't bad per se, but it would have benefited a lot more from more efficient ways to get them out of the deck than a grade 3 set order that needed to like CB1 and retire Rigor to get 1 to hand. Like,
yeah, I was about to say, what that deck needed was just to print like 12 different varieties of find a Radalina, find a Radalina, find a Radalina.
Yeah, if it had the 1 rear guard that could like get 1 from deck or drop, I know that sounds like a lot, but
even
like,
if it was like a top 7 searcher,
yeah,
so it's, like,
yeah,
still try to find.
Exactly,
so
yeah.
It's not guaranteed, but like it still helps out.
Yeah, because when it got its promo that could go into this version of Roa, it just had a lot of shield. Which like wasn't really what the deck needed when we're seeing other promos for glitter decks have like, check top 7 for a keyworded thing like the one that Michu has, or the one that Ava got that could call itself from the drop zone. I think that would be very helpful for it because it doesn't usually have a problem really building a board, but it always has a problem getting a good attacker for its column that Radilina's not in. So yeah, I don't know, this deck is cool and it's not bad, but it just never quite got out of its like puberty pains of being like a really clunky piece reliant deck. So
yeah, and even the like new promos we got for all the glitter bosses that let you like early go into them, man, the unit you're going into isn't like monstrously better like all the other bosses have, unfortunately.
Yeah. The other deck we got in here though, I actually like completely
forgot.
I was about Mythiarch. Yeah, Mythiarch's in here too. Yep.
I put it down and I was just like, thanks for the promo.
Yep. It's actually a really creative deck in my opinion.
I don't remember what this deck does. You're gonna have to tell me.
Yeah, so Mythiarch Habitat itself as an order this deck got as a promo wasn't really so much to do with Mythiarch itself. It does help it and it will run it, but this is actually one of the Stoicheia decks, like Leonore, that doesn't really care too much about using orders and has a very open-ended playstyle. It just wants to have as many I believe it wants to have like as many Mythiarch named cards on its board at any given time, because when it's placed, it has the chance to make your opponent discard a card, which is actually kind of cute. Like you don't see that in bosses nowadays. And then it has a sort of weird kind of thing where it and its rear guards can like bounce its rear guards back to your hand, so you can recall them because they all have on-place effects. And I think the idea is they want you to use those on-place effects multiple times in a row, which is it's actually pretty creative for what it is. It just never quite got there because instead of being super piece reliant on needing like an order or what have you, it was super piece reliant on always needing a full board of Mythiarchs and differently named ones most of the time. So yeah, just an awkward spot.
Like there have been so many decks that they're like have four different names, and the ones that have been good, like Flame Glam, have on the Vanguard find a new one.
Yeah.
Where like Clarissa, Mythiarch.
Well, this one on place does look at the top 7 to call a thing, but it only made your opponent discard a card during that timing of when it's placed. So after you call a card to rear, if that wasn't your 5th Mythiarch, or if that wasn't your 5th unit in general, your opponent wouldn't be discarding. So it was still like a +1 to the board, which is nice, but it had a couple more hoops than the average deck sometimes, it felt. So.
Yeah.
But I think going past that, beyond like Rosarium Fairy in set 12, I don't remember much else that was in there.
Hey Cole, what if I told you forgot another mask deck?
What is it?
Magnolia Mask.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna be honest, I just blank mask decks out of my brain a lot. Because
how can you though? The mask is like, I think Stoicheia and Brantgate are like the two nations that benefited the most from the mask. And yes, Magnolia Mask isn't like the strongest mask.
It was actually really cool and kind of good when it came out.
I love the design of it, that it used the Dragon Tree markers for something other than just
it actually referenced
when
them.
You're on. Yeah, I like that because it did the Magnolia thing of letting you attack from the back row, but it did a weird thing by making you put your Dragon Tree markers in the back, where like the most common play pattern is just like my front 2 rare circles and then whatever else, I guess.
Yeah,
if
because
you
it could
even
only
get
let
there.
stuff attack from the back row if it was on a Dragon Tree marker, I think.
Yes, I believe
Yeah,
that's
and
what.
it also gave them 10k, and I believe he also had like a thing where if your rear guard on a Dragon Tree a marker hits, you get to like retire an opponent's rear guard or something like that.
Yep.
It's kind of cute. Yeah,
That
it was
its,
definitely one of the
remove.
more creative mask decks. So I agree.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, oh man, I went second. Discard or use the mask, since it's not a deck that really is reliant on orders. Loud Intelligence is good, but if you're just using the mask order, you don't really need it. And then you just go into it, Persona Ride, you've given 10k to your whole board because of Magnelia, Mask's effect. Drawing a card, like, the card is good.
Yep, and then yeah, so yeah, that was the big stuff from set 12, and then
Hey, you keep on. Wow, Cole.
what?
Don't hear Elmadar. These cats were great.
Oh my gosh. Yep.
Don't-
Yeah, that's fair.
I'm bullying you with cards that are good.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I'm trying to keep it to boss units, but no, that is a fairly
I
relevant
think
generic card in the fact that it was a generic way to soul charge in the nation.
Yeah.
We just didn't have that for whatever reason.
God, I love these cats. I think they fixed a lot of problems with a lot of nations. And other than the Keter one, I don't think they're like frustratingly expensive, and they just got reprinted, so they're gonna go down. But
They
I remember seeing Elmadar got reprinted.
I don't think so.
No?
I wish they got reprinted. They all need to get
I have a
reprinted.
second different printing of Elmadar then from somewhere.
Weird.
All right, I'm looking this up.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Looking
Yeah.
this up.
While you're doing that, I guess. Yeah, that's fair. Those are always relevant to talk about, especially with that, especially that one because it let you soul charge. But yeah.
No, Elmadar is just cheap as can be. Oh my god. Shout out to Elmadar. Also, Florence exists. The same cycle as Sajas. It's not good, but that card exists. It's not awful, but
yeah. But in set 13 was when we finally got so back when Zorga Mask came out, I personally think that was the first time that Stoicheia got a deck that was like a really, really strong a contender in the meta. Like Zorga Mask was a tier 1 deck. It was very good. If you let it go second, then you were in for a really rough time. You had to focus on the huge columns it was bringing out and how to space that out through a game. And then in set 13, when Leonorn got her new form that let her whole board booster, and then you could do kind of a like grade 4 Bruce thing where you could stand 3 units, and it would always usually be just 3 units in your front row because it could stand anything, and it would give her like drive -1 or whatever. It was doing like a grade 4 Bruce thing essentially, but with what Leonorn was doing already, and that was just enough for her to finally be like a really, really solid tier 1 threat. I think it's so cool.
Vivace, man, that I don't know how this one card fixed most of the problems with the deck. Like, genuinely. Because the problem with Leonorn up until like that point was you swung with Leonorn, they PG'd it, and you went, okay, you're taking 2-3 damage now, and not threatening a whole lot. But like Vivace had so much pressure. And I like the design of this deck, that it's in the like grade 4 heavy quotation marks where you have to write it on top of a grade 3. And Bushi, if you're listening, do not give it an early ride. I don't think it needs it.
Yeah, for sure.
I
think this deck has a really solid place in today's meta now, with the one weakness it had not being like completely negated, but definitely mitigated in the set order in the recent festival booster. This deck needed to live to its turn 4. A lot of the times it would get so crippled by the pressure other decks would churn out on their turn 3 or turn 4 that it just couldn't get there, and then sometimes if it did, it wouldn't put up a good enough board to really kill the opponent, because even sometimes on its Vivace turn it didn't kill on that turn, which was fine, it happened. But reaching your persona right turn on Vivace was so important because that most decks couldn't survive that, but it could just never get there. But now with it having a bit more defensive plays it can make, it finally feels a bit more complete, you know?
Yeah, on some aspects, I like that Leonore still gets to exist in the meta. On some aspects, I'm like, man, this deck is a pile of generics.
It can be. I build the way I play her. I play a ton of her more targeted stuff. A lot of her, like, grade 1s she got that can help you draw or revive units and stuff like that. But yeah, there's definitely the more popular build, which is just using all the cards that can, like, make plant tokens, and all the generic cycle cards that can help you build a board or help you out defensively or whatever, which I think there's pros and cons to both. So.
Yeah. I've always been I like when in archetype things are strong. I've just got that from are stronger than, like, generics. Probably because, you know, the games I've played are things like Yu-Gi-Oh! Before, where your in archetype stuff gets to be a little stronger than the generic. But I do like having good generics, though, because there are some decks that will, like, out the gate not get any support, and it feels bad.
For sure.
So I'm glad those exist. I don't like when decks that are this old and this established are outperformed by the generics, though, in most instances.
Yeah, for sure. At least I think this deck is a really good example of one that has multiple builds that do fairly well in between the generic cards it could run or the target support it could run. And I think that's, like, really cool for a deck like this, especially.
I also remember with Vivace, just, like, we saw it come out and we were like, 6 attacks, and, like, we were like, what? Which, you know, I like that, like, Stoicheia is, like, the only nation that really does 6 attacks.
It definitely, like, comes off that way more than other nations. Other nations do definitely have the ability to get 6 attacks. There are very few decks in other nations that, like, from the boss unit itself is telling you that, hey, you are getting 6 attacks with me if you play me right. Like, in Dark States, grade 4 Bruce stands the whole front row, so you can get 6 attacks there. But that's, like, the only Dark States card that it says on it that you're getting 6 attacks out of me. But yeah, like, in this nation, you have, like, a Magnolia in this deck, and, you know,
like, Maelstrom has so many rear guards that enable it to try to hit those 6 attacks.
For
like,
sure. But then we
don't forget Mushi King, Cole. You are forgetting the most important Stoicheia.
I have a very strong collab deck policy, okay? I think it's only worth mentioning here because somehow it was meta relevant.
yeah, but no, I just put Mushi King. I just thought it was funny.
It was a cute deck, for sure.
It just feels so bizarre to open a pack and see a Mushi King card, but I don't even know what that deck does.
That's fair. I don't know if I really want to get into it.
Alright, I didn't want to talk about it either. I just wanted to mention that it existed.
Yep, but the last big overdressed deck for Stoicheia, having a really big aggressive push for its main gimmick, kind of goes in the opposite direction with the first Stoicheia Divines deck being a Lascaria, which is actually one of the more tanky, defensively built decks in the game, I think.
Yeah. This has honestly... First of all, Mega Colony finally exists in Stoicheia. There had not been a, like, Vanguard bug boss up until this point. I just want to point that out, because that is my favorite nation, or my favorite clan is Mega Colony. So to finally see that we got a boss representative of some of the history that just... How long was until CZ1? How long had Standard been out?
3 years.
3 years? Yeah, for 3 years for one clan to just get 0 representation or something adjacent to it, even in, like, aesthetic. But man, this deck is so fun. It is so fun to like actually have playing the game on your opponent's turn.
Yeah.
It's one of the few decks that get to because its main mechanic of every time you use a blitz order to guard, if you successfully guarded, you draw a card, and if you haven't countercharged, you get to countercharge. So I like that I've played this deck. I'm probably going to play it till the end of standard. I love this deck so much.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the decks that I saw when Divines was starting that made me really like hopeful about the design they were finally tapping into, because this deck came along with a blitz order that let you play multiple blitz orders in one turn, and that card, what it represents for Stoicheia is like really important to me, because it's not locked to Lascaria as much as it works the best with her, obviously. The fact that a lot of Stoicheia decks like run it as a tech of like a 2-of or so speaks to what I was talking about earlier, where Stoicheia is one of the nations that like uses and runs tech cards the best. Like there's so many pieces of utility that these orders can give to any deck, and that's what sets Stoicheia apart to me. It's like there's so many different ways to build any one deck.
Yeah, and Lascaria actually brought a lot of these weird old blitz order tech pieces that they had before back to life, like Sweet Honey Nectar, I think is the name of the card. That card got back to life. There's a couple other blitz orders that got it, and it fits this weird like tech part of the nation where like most Lascaria lists are running like 1-1-1-1. There's like we run about 3 1-of blitz orders, 3 to 4 outside of your package of the 4 Evervescent Blade, which feels so fun.
Yeah, as far as like how this deck performs competitively, it's weird. I think to me, the way I've noticed this deck pop up, it never feels like a tier 1 deck. It almost feels like it just feels like a fairly solid rogue deck, or like an anti-meta deck. Like against the decks that want to use all their resources on that one big turn where they push out as much as they can, and this deck can live through that. It feels like decks like those can only handle being attacked from a 2-crit Vanguard that's giving 5k to its board like so many times. You know?
Yeah.
It feels like it has just enough to live through those decks that have a lot of output but don't live in the same way it would against a deck that like, you know, doesn't have 5 attacks and gets a crit on its Vanguard and stuff like that.
Yeah, the like Lascaria is good against all the like 5 attack decks, and is like where they swing with their rear guards multiple times, and is awful against any deck that just does a dote effect where it's just attacking twice with its Vanguard. Just cause the thing with blitz orders that feels really nice in the gameplay loop is like your opponent attacks you for 30. You can put 20 in front of that and be good. You don't have to guess against their Vanguard hitting triggers at all to make sure you're getting that card draw off of Lascaria.
Yeah, that's true. It really does come down to like how efficiently you're using your blitz orders, and it's always a really big gamble if you decide to use them on the Vanguard, because if it does end up hitting, then you don't get a whole ability of your Vanguard. Yeah,
you've wasted the cards in hand, you've taken the damage, you don't get the draw, you get nothing.
Yeah, it really demands a lot from the player, I guess, to understand decks like attack patterns and stuff like that.
Yeah, and a lot of Stoicheia decks have this thing where it's a very intensive thing of like Zorga is a very hard deck to play correctly.
Oh yeah,
a lot of the time.
Yeah, like I said, this is a very technical nation. Even the decks that operate fairly simply, like the idea
Magnolia.
of just using blitz order, like just using blitz orders a lot, like that sounds simple, but it's very technical in how you need to do it to optimize it and get the most out of the mechanic.
Yeah, it sounds like, I'm the last Karia player, so of course I'm gonna go, this deck's hard, and, I'm big brain for playing it. But
no, Stoicheia overall is pretty...
But this nation does, and especially the order-based, both order types, Vanguards have, a lot more in-depth to them.
Yeah, and, that going into set 2 of Divines, we got the current version of Zorga, which is... It's just good. I don't know what else there is really to say about Zorga as a deck in general. It was just Zorga, but now it has a baked-in 4th attack that you can do once per game, and it handles its resources a bit better with how it recycles its orders back into its hand and how it can do Alchemagic. It's just good. It's just good.
And it got rear guards to replace all the old ones.
Yeah.
And it got more copies of RPD, which was generally the problem with that deck was, did you find RPD, Roaming Prison Dragon? Yeah? Okay. You're probably going to be fine overall as long as you got the orders to support it. If not, you were kind of dead in the water.
Yeah, it's, I think the one weakness of this deck that I think Zorga has always had, which was mitigated a little bit by Mask. It sort of depended on how you built the deck whether you ran the order that gave him Drive +1 or not. Was this deck, I've noticed the few times I've played against it, is that the pressure it can put out is very overwhelming, especially on the turn it uses its divine skill. But weirdly enough, it actually doesn't hold that much of a hand if you don't see the right pieces leading up.
Yeah,
to your turn 4, so.
The thing, I've only played against New Zorga a little bit, and I've been playing against, builds at, locals. And I think at least the local level, some people haven't adapted that New Zorga can cut down on a couple orders, so it doesn't run into the issue of, I have no shield value in hand because I'm holding 7 orders in hand.
Yeah.
Which is just, I think they need to, I think Zorga only gets better as either just deck building gets better on it, because that deck does have a lot in its deck building cost on things.
For sure. And speaking of deck building costs, we've got in set 3 we've got another bug. There's more bugs.
Bushi loves me.
Yeah, this deck is actually really cool. I think it's kind of trying to occupy the same space that Zorga has, where it gets to play multiple orders turn, but it's more funneled into its a specific codex orders, and especially the one that they're all kind of more control based. They're not trying to do too much for itself, giving your opponent's Vanguard -1 drive or giving them -5k. It's cute stuff like that. I don't really know how good this deck is, if I'm being honest, but it doesn't sound bad.
From what I've seen from the couple things I've seen from the Japanese meta, is that this deck is actually relatively fine. It does 5 attacks. Its control elements do work. The thing that normally is the problem with these normal order decks is you're holding all these worthless normal orders that don't do anything on your opponent's turn. At least when you're progressing the game state and using your normal orders on Stoicheia, you do, giving all your opponents front row -3, or all their Vanguards -3 and -1 drive, that might as well be a defensive card.
Yeah,
essentially. That at least recoups you some of the value that you would have lost by just holding a normal order in hand.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I wonder how it will perform in the English meta, because the set he's coming out comes out next week, so I guess we'll see.
The 2 decks, it is the two front runners in that in that set are not Vanguard reliant, unfortunately for it. It's going to be Archite and Shojidoji, which have both proven to be very good and strong decks.
Right.
But I've heard it's just a really clean sleeper, which has a lot of room in it to just put whatever you want.
Sure. Yeah.
I have a very positive opinion of this Vanguard.
Oh yeah, it's
despite
cool.
never playing it.
Oh yeah, it's just I respect the design for sure. And other designs I respect is the last deck we'll talk about tonight, which is
Oh my god,
Levy
Bros.
Draws.
Yeah.
What?
You,
Did I skip something again?
Cristianos.
Well, okay, well, I don't know if I want to get into
Alright.
starter deck bosses when we're already running this long. Maybe at some point we'll cover
We'll
them
talk
all
about
at
all of
once.
them. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, Levy Dross, he's cool. I actually kind of like the idea that they went back to markers, but just for him.
Another, like, yes, he is a forest dragon. He's a bug. He is a giant bug.
Yep.
And
got the cool wings.
I love the design of this boss. I love that he has a defensive skill. I like that he encourages that, like, multi-attacking in a weird way that only Stoicheia likes to do. His divine skill doesn't shape, like, the landscape of the game and can just end it on the spot, but is still, like, an effective, powerful tool. Man,
yeah, it's just a solid deck. Like, its rear guards can let each other, like, attack from the back row or what have you.
They're either, like, on Infinity Eyes markers or in the same columns as them.
Yeah,
which is sick. And then
its marker letting you nerf opponents units that are on them when they attack and letting you draw when they do is, like, also really cool. Like, it's just
this archetype has a baked-in bubble mind. Like, this can't be bad.
Yeah, and yeah, it's definitely one of the more creative divine bosses that I think have come out, because I think markers have always been kind of a untapped thing as far as, like, how traumatized people were from
like
V
cradle
era,
markers and, like, force markers and all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
The fact that they gave us a bug boss that had markers on it, I knew put, like, the fear of God into people. Because Gridora had cradle markers, and she is kind of oppressive to play against at times.
It depends. I think they kind of emulated it as well as they could without going too far off the deep end, which is minus 10k. Minus 10k sounds perfectly fine.
Yeah, in the world of divines, where we're still, like, it negates a persona ride sometimes. Some units just get up to 30k power just naturally through the course of, gameplay. It feels nice that, it's effective, but it also goes away after a turn, so it's not.
And it's like it's another Stoicheia deck that's actually not too great against very Vanguard selfish decks. Like, yeah. If you have a restanding Vanguard, you don't care too much about what this deck is doing because you can't put Infinity Eyes markers on the Vanguard, which is, like, fine. Every deck has to have a weakness, so I'm not too worried about that. The set he came out in literally just came out in Japan like a week ago, so I feel like I saw him show up to top, like, maybe once or twice, but I think we're still kind of it's up in the air how good this deck truly is.
Yeah, and I feel like he will be very tested as he is, the main boss unit of the season. He is the big bad enemy, so he is gonna be popular. He's gonna see a lot of play, so we're gonna see this list, unless it is absolutely terrible, which from the cards I can't guess that it will be abysmal.
Yeah, and I think with that'll kind of round out Stoicheia as it is a nation right now. It does a lot of stuff, and I think it succeeded in the amount of different things it kind of tried to catch under the same umbrella. Sometimes it still, it'll never get away from the fact that it's a very peace reliant nation. What it needs to do requires a lot of different pieces to come together to do what it needs to do, but I think for people who like that idea of, like, maybe you're like the combo player, or you like, trying to have a bit more of an unorthodox play style, it definitely rewards you for putting the effort in with it.
Yeah, like, I think they finally got Stoicheia in a healthy spot, because from even, like, the get-go up until, like, set, like, 8, 9, and 10, it was kind of like an underdog nation. It just didn't have bosses that competed with other different decks. Like, it just was doing all its weird stuff, and, like, it was harder to play for a worse payoff. Now they're actually rewarding the playstyles of those decks to a point where they actually feel like in a nice healthy spot against the other nations, which I know can sometimes be a problem, like current Japanese tournament results show.
Sure. Yeah. Anything else on this before we wrap it up?
I really love this nation. I'm glad I got to talk about it. If you like cool nature stuff, like bugs, plants, that kind of stuff, and are willing to put in time and effort into a hard-to-learn but rewarding playstyle, Stoicheia is for you.
Absolutely. And with that, if you watched until the end of the video, or listen rather, thank you. If you like this kind of content, be sure to like the video and subscribe to keep up with every time we upload one of these and all the other content we put out. And I guess I don't usually say it, but ring that bell for notifications.
There you go.
When we upload them. But until next time, I was Cole.
And I'm Jared.
And we'll see you in the next one.